So this section is 11.4, and we're going to be using intercepts to graph the quadratic function. And we don't always have to use the quadratic formula to find our x-intercepts, because we can do other means such as factoring. So that's what we're going to show in this particular problem. So we're going to be given an equation like this one. It's got some fractions in it. We haven't done anything with a fraction, so it's kind of nice to have that in there. And then does the graph open upward or downward? We need to be able to say that. Why we know that? Does it get wider or narrower? Find the axes of symmetry and vertex. Find the discriminant, determine the number of x-intercepts. We want to know the y-intercept. Okay, find that, and then do a final sketch is what we want to do. So let's go to our pad. We have the equation of f of x equal to negative 1/2 x squared, and that's plus x plus 3/2. Okay, and so the first question wanted to know, does the graph open upward or downward? Well, we always look at the A. A tells us that. So A is negative 1/2. And since it's negative, then that means the graph is going to open up. It's going to open up downward. So it's going to do something like this. Okay. And then it wants to know also, does it go wider or narrower? Well, because this is a fraction, fractions tend to cause the graph to open wider. So it's going to open up downward, but it's going to be a lot wider than its normal effect. So it'll be wider. And the reason why we know that is because it's a fraction of 1/2. And so that's the reason. If it had been a whole number bigger than 1, then it would be narrower. So that takes care of A. So we know it's going to be a graph opening up downward, and it's going to be a lot wider. The second question is find the axes of symmetry. So we want to find the axes of symmetry, right? As well as they want to know the vertex point. Okay, and we've done this in the past. So we just need the A, which is going to be negative 1/2, and we need the B, which in this case is 1, because the B is right here. So it's a 1. So we know the vertex formula is x equal to negative b over 2a. So we put in the b, which is 1, and there's negative already in there, 2 times a negative 1/2. So I get negative 1 over, and 2 times a half down here becomes a negative 1. And so then we get 1 as our answer for x. So now we know x equals 1. So my vertex point is 1 comma y right now. This is my vertex point. So to find the y, we have to put that back into the original. So we're going to go to f of 1 equal to negative 1/2 1 squared plus 1 plus 3/2. So 1 squared is 1, so I'm just going to get a negative 1/2. And I know 1 in terms of a fraction of a half has to be 2 over 2 plus 3 over 2. So this makes it easy. I know it's negative 1 plus 2 plus 3 all over 2. And so I get negative 1 plus 2 is 1, and 1 plus 3 is 4. So this is 4/2, which is 2. So now I know my vertex point is 1 comma 2. Okay, and so I could graph that on my calculator to see that that actually is true. So I'll go to y equals, and I'll type that in. So negative 1/2 x to the power of 2. Okay, and then I'm going to add x, and then I'm going to add 3/2. Okay, hit graph, So zoom 6 just to see if I get a decent graph. There it is. It's definitely going downward, and it's a little bit wider. And so I want to know the vertex is here. That's going to be my maximum. So second calc, I'll go to the maximum, which is 4. Put my cursor on the left, hit enter. Put my cursor on the right, hit enter, and then enter again. And so it tells me it's at 1, 2. It's exactly what I got here. I just ignore this 0007. This calculator is trying to be very accurate, but 1, 2 is the best we really need. So that took care of my B. Then C says find the discriminant and determine the number of X-intercepts. So I'm going to do C now. So see if I can draw a line so I have separation. So here's C up here. And so my discriminant is B squared minus 4AC. So my B is 1 squared minus 4 times a negative half times 3 halves. So I get 1. It's going to be plus because the 2 negatives. And then 2 times 2 here is 4, so that's going to cancel with this 4 and give me 3. So I'm going to get an answer of 4. So that means I'm going to get 2 solutions, because that's what the discriminant is telling me, is I'm going to get 2 solutions. So that's what I'll be doing when I find that. So I want to go to D now. D says what's the y-intercept? And what is the x-intercept? So the y-intercept is where x is 0. So I'm going to put 0 in for x, which that's a nice one. So f of 0 is negative 1/2 times 0 squared plus 0 plus 3 halves. So this goes away to give me just 3 halves. So I know my y-intercept is nothing more than 0, and it's 1.5. So because 3 divided by 2, it is 1.5. So I have my y-intercept. The x-intercept's a little trickier. So I'm going to set that equal to 0. So negative 1/2 x plus 3 halves equal to 0. Now we've used the quadratic formula, but I don't like halves in my quadratic formula. So I might just go ahead and multiply this whole thing by 2 because of the denominator. So 2 times the half is negative 1x. 2 times the x is 2x. And 2 times the 3 halves is 3. And 2 times 0 is 0. So that's good. And you know, sometimes it's easier to just factor than to use the quadratic formula. So I'm wondering if I can factor this. Oh, this is also x squared. Sorry about that. So we'll see if that works. So I'm going to actually also, I don't like my leading coefficient negative, so I'm going to move everything to the other side, because then it makes things a lot easier. So this will be x squared minus 2x minus 3. And so it will be equal to 0 on this side. So now I could easily do this. So I've got x and x, because the x times the x is the x squared. What makes negative 3? Well, 3 and 1, but one of them has to be negative. And so my middle term has to be negative, so I'm going to make the 3 negative and the 1 positive. And so here are my two x-intercepts. X minus 3 equal to 0 and x plus 1 equal to 0. So x is 3 and x is negative 1. So that gives me 3, 0 and negative 1, 0. So if I was to graph this, then I have my y-intercept, which was at what was that? Here is 1.5. So here is 1, 2. So somewhere right here. Then this one here has got 3. 1, 2, 3. And then I have negative 1. So there's 1 here. I didn't find my axes of symmetry. Well, I didn't say I had it, but I actually did. It's right here. It's just equal to x. So my axes of symmetry is x equal to 1. So here it is at 1, so it goes up and down. So here's my axes of symmetry at x equal to 1. And my lowest point I found was, I figured that one out. That was the 1, 2. So I go over 1 up 2. And it's negative, so everything's going to go downward. So it goes downward like so. And so that looks pretty darn close to my graph when I did it the first time. So here it looks like that. And so I can see by going to second table that at 3, 0, it is a 0, like I calculated. Is negative 1, 0 there? Yep, negative 1, 0 is there. My y-intercept is at 0, 1.5. Yep, and I did calculate my my vertex point. So yeah, so I've done all the pieces. So there's lots of pieces, and this is exactly what's going to show up on a final, is that you'll have to do all these pieces to show me that you understand how to graph accurately a quadratic equation.